Dear Anne, my husband refuses to get rid of anything. He's 81. We've been married 29 years. And the basement, the garage, the workbench, it's all still packed with stuff he hasn't touched in 2 decades. Every time she brings it up, he shuts her down. No way, end of conversation. If you read that letter and felt your chest tighten a little, you're not alone. Because here's the thing, this isn't really a story about clutter. It's a story about money, about control, about fear. And honestly, it's playing out in millions of homes right now between couples who've been together for decades, who love each other, and who are quietly going broke. Not from spending too much, but from refusing to let go of things that are costing them every single day they hold on to them. So let's actually talk about what's happening here. Because on the surface, this looks like a tidiness problem. He's messy, she's neat. Classic odd couple, right? Wrong. Look, what we're really looking at is one of the most expensive, least talked about financial leaks in retirement. And it's not the cost of the stuff itself, it's the cost of what that stuff is doing to the people living around it. Hello, I'm Anne. Welcome to my channel. This video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal, tax, or financial advice. Let's start with a number that should make you sit up. The National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals has found that the average American loses something like 55 minutes a day just looking for things they own but can't find. 55 minutes every single day. Now stretch that across a year. That's over 300 hours. That's like working 2 extra months a year, unpaid, just hunting through your own basement for a wrench you already own 3 of. And here's where it gets real for retirees specifically. When you're on a fixed income, time isn't just time anymore. It's recovery time. It's health. It's the hours you have left to actually enjoy your life instead of negotiating with cardboard boxes. An 81-year-old climbing over decades of unused tools to get to the water heater isn't a quirky inconvenience. It's a fall risk, and falls in adults over 80 are one of the leading causes of hospitalization, according to the CDC. We're not talking about a messy garage anymore. We're talking about a $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 hospital bill waiting to happen, hidden behind a workbench nobody's used since George W. Bush was in office. Now, here's where most people get this completely backwards. They think decluttering is about the house. It's not. Decluttering, especially at this stage of life, is fundamentally a financial decision disguised as a chore. And once you see it that way, everything changes. Think about it like this. Imagine your garage is a storage unit, because functionally that's exactly what it is. If you rented a 10 by 20 storage unit somewhere in the US today, you'd be paying, conservatively, somewhere between $150 and $250 a month, depending on your city. That's not nothing. That's somewhere between $1,800 and $3,000 a year. Now here's the kicker. This couple isn't renting that space. They own it, which means they already paid for it once when they bought the house. They're paying property tax on it every year whether they use it or not, and they're paying to heat and cool a square footage that is functionally serving as a museum for tools nobody picks up anymore. So when he says, "I'm not getting rid of anything," what he's actually saying, without realizing it, is, "I'd rather keep paying rent on a storage unit forever than deal with the discomfort of letting go." And look, I get it. I'm not here to dunk on the guy, because the psychology underneath this is way more interesting and way more human than "he's just stubborn." Here's a stat that blew my mind when I first came across it. Researchers at Yale actually did brain scans on people while they were deciding whether to throw away an item they owned versus an item that belonged to someone else. And get this, when people had to decide on their own possessions, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, the parts of your brain associated with pain and conflict, lit up dramatically more than when they were deciding about someone else's stuff. Letting go of your own possessions isn't emotionally neutral. Your brain treats it almost like a small loss, a tiny grief every single time. Now multiply that by 81 years of life, a career, maybe a business, maybe a war, or a hard upbringing where nothing was ever wasted. And you start to understand why just throw it out sounds to him like just amputate a piece of my identity. For a lot of men, especially in that generation, the garage and the workbench weren't just storage. That was the room where they were useful, where they fixed things, provided for the family, solved problems with their hands. Getting rid of the tools can feel on some subconscious level like admitting, I am no longer the man who fixes things. And that is a much heavier thing to ask someone to accept than, can we clean the garage? So here's the first mistake almost everyone makes when they're in this exact situation. And I want you to really hear this. The mistake is leading with logic. We don't need this anymore. You haven't touched this in 20 years. This is just clutter. All true, all completely useless. Because you're trying to solve an emotional problem with a spreadsheet. And that almost never works. Not on him, not on you, not on anybody. Let me give you a metaphor that I think nails this. Imagine you're trying to get a stubborn knot out of a necklace chain. If you yank on it hard, what happens? It tightens. The knot gets smaller, denser, harder to undo. But if you very gently wiggle it, work at the edges, give it room to loosen on its own terms, it eventually slides free almost effortlessly. Most people, when they confront a spouse about clutter, are yanking on the chain. Frustration, ultimatums, guilt trips. This house is a disaster because of you. Every yank tightens the knot. He digs in harder. Now it's not about tools anymore. It's about pride. And nobody backs down from a fight about pride. So what actually works? Let's get into it, because this is where I want to give you something real you can use, not just feel-good advice. Step 1, and this is the one almost nobody does. Separate the emotional conversation from the financial conversation completely. Don't talk about feelings and dollars in the same breath, because the brain can't process both at once without picking a side, and it'll usually pick the emotional side and dig in. So here's what that looks like in practice. Instead of, we need to clear out the garage, you sit down, maybe over coffee, no pressure, no deadline, and you say something like, hey, I was doing some math on what it actually costs us every year to keep heating and cooling the basement and garage space, and I wanted to show you the number. Notice what's happening here. You're not asking him to throw anything away. You're not even mentioning his stuff. You're just sharing information, like you would about a utility bill. That's a completely different nervous system response. There's no threat to his identity in a number. And by the way, this isn't a manipulation trick. This is just good financial communication. Studies on retirement couples and money conversations, including research published by Fidelity, consistently show that couples who frame financial decisions around shared numbers and shared goals fight dramatically less than couples who frame decisions around personal habits or personal possessions. Because nobody feels attacked by a number, everybody feels attacked by, you need to change. Step 2. Reframe the goal from getting rid of stuff to buying back your time and your safety. This is huge, and here's why. Get rid of your tools sounds like a loss. Let's clear a path so you don't trip carrying the laundry sounds like a gain. For him, too. You're not asking him to lose his workbench. You're asking to invest in not ending up in a hospital bed because of it. And listen, that's not even an exaggeration for effect. The National Council on Aging reports that 1 in 4 Americans over 65 falls every single year. And falls are the leading cause of both fatal and non-fatal injuries in that age group. When you frame decluttering as fall prevention instead of spring cleaning, you're speaking a language that actually lands, especially with a man who might brush off, it looks messy, but will absolutely listen to, I'm worried about your hip. Step 3, and this is the one that I think is the real unlock for this specific letter. Don't ask him to get rid of everything. Ask him to choose what stays. This sounds like a small wording difference, but psychologically, it's enormous. Get rid of it puts him in a defensive, reactive position. He's protecting territory. Choose what stays puts him in the driver's seat. He's not the guy being stripped of his stuff. He's the guy making the call. Here's how that might sound. I'm not asking you to throw out the workbench. I'm asking you to pick the 10 tools that actually matter to you, and we'll build a little space just for those, and we'll let the rest go to people who'll actually use them. Now here's the magic part. When people are asked to choose what to keep instead of what to discard, research on choice architecture, the same psychology behind how Amazon designs checkout pages, shows that people consistently end up keeping less than they would have if you'd framed it the opposite way. Because once he's the one doing the picking, his brain treats every item he doesn't pick as not chosen, rather than taken away. And not chosen doesn't trigger that same loss response in the brain that taken from me does. Now let's talk money again for a second, because I promised you this is a finance video, and I mean it. Here's something almost nobody calculates when they're sitting on decades of unused tools and equipment. That stuff has resale value that is actively decaying every single year it sits there. Power tools, vintage hand tools, certain garage equipment, these have real markets on places like Facebook Marketplace, eBay, and specialty tool auction sites. But used tool values, like most depreciating assets, drop the longer they sit unsold and the more outdated the models become. A drill that might fetch $80 today could be worth half that in 5 years, once newer battery technology makes it obsolete. That table saw from 1998 isn't appreciating like fine wine. It's depreciating quietly in the dark every single year nobody touches it. So when this couple sits on a garage full of tools just in case, what they're actually doing, financially speaking, is letting a pile of liquidatable assets slowly bleed value, while simultaneously paying property tax, square footage costs, and now, increasingly, health risk to keep storing it. If you ran this as a business, you'd call it a terrible investment. Negative yield, depreciating asset, rising holding costs, with a side of liability risk. Nobody would sign off on that deal. But because it's wrapped in sentimental packaging, in "I might need this someday," we treat it completely differently than we'd treat the exact same math in a spreadsheet. And here's a stat that I think reframes this whole conversation. According to surveys done by senior move managers, and yes, that's an actual profession now, people who specialize in helping older adults downsize, somewhere around 80% of items that get kept just in case during a move are never used again within the next 5 years. 80%. That means for every 5 things he's holding on to with that "I might need this" logic, 4 of them are basically guaranteed to just sit there, taking up space, taking up mental bandwidth, taking up square footage that's costing real dollars every month. Now I want to address the elephant in the room, because if you're watching this and you're the spouse in this situation, you're probably exhausted. 29 years of marriage, and you've been carrying the mental and physical weight of an entire basement's worth of someone else's decisions. That stress is real, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend a clever reframing trick magically dissolves decades of frustration overnight. But here's something important to understand about why this particular fight, clutter in retirement, hits differently than almost any other marital disagreement about money. It's because it's rarely actually about money or mess. It's about 2 people approaching the same chapter of life from 2 completely different emotional starting points. She's likely feeling the walls close in, literally and figuratively, as mobility, energy, and time start to feel more limited, and she wants the space around her to feel light, manageable, safe. He may be feeling something closer to a quiet panic about relevance, about purpose, about what's left to hold on to now that work, daily projects, and physical capability are fading. The garage isn't junk to him. It's evidence that he still exists as the guy who built things. Taking that away too fast, too bluntly, can feel like erasing him. So the actual answer here, the one that blends the emotional and the financial the way this needs to be blended, looks something like this. First, stop trying to do this in one big conversation or one big weekend purge. That's the yank the chain approach, and it almost always backfires with someone who's dug in this deep. Instead, set a recurring low-stakes rhythm, say 20 minutes every Sunday, where you go through one small section together, not the whole garage, one shelf, one drawer, small enough that it never feels like a confrontation, consistent enough that it actually adds up over months. Second, bring in outside framing if you can, because sometimes the message lands better from a neutral third party than from a spouse. This could be as simple as printing out an article on fall prevention statistics for older adults, or even something playful like watching a downsizing or tiny house show together and using it as a conversation starter. That's kind of like what we could do with the garage. Letting the idea come from out there rather than from me lowers his guard significantly. Third, and this one's underrated, give him a final say over a designated untouchable zone. One shelf, one drawer, one corner that's entirely his, no negotiation, forever. This sounds counterintuitive, like you're letting him win, but it actually does something powerful psychologically. It removes the all-or-nothing framing. He's no longer fighting a war to keep everything because he's terrified that giving an inch means losing it all. He's defending one small, secure territory, which makes him far more willing to let go of everything outside it. Fourth, get specific and concrete about where things go, instead of vague about what's being lost. "We're getting rid of this" feels like erasure. This is going to a young guy down the street who's just starting out and can't afford his own tools. Feels like legacy. Several senior downsizing specialists have noted that elderly clients are dramatically more willing to part with tools and equipment when they know specifically who will benefit: a grandchild, a local trade school, a community workshop, versus just donating it into the void. The story of where it's going matters as much as the act of letting it go. And fifth, if after all of this he still won't budge on the bulk of it, consider this option, because it's the one most people don't think of. You don't have to win the whole war today. You can functionally downsize without him agreeing to get rid of a single item by simply changing how the space is organized. Vertical shelving, clear bins, a single accessible walking path. Sometimes the real problem isn't the volume of stuff, it's the chaos of access. A garage with 30 boxes neatly shelved and labeled is a completely different safety and stress situation than the same 30 boxes scattered across the floor. If he won't let go of the stuff, you can still reclaim safety and sanity by reclaiming the layout. Now here's the bigger truth I want to leave you with, because I think it's the most important financial lesson hiding inside this entire letter, and it has nothing to do with garages or tools at all. The real cost of clutter in retirement isn't the square footage. It's the compounding stress on the relationship that's supposed to be carrying you through the hardest, most uncertain years of your life. You've got two people in their 80s, navigating health, navigating mortality, navigating a finite and shrinking runway of time together. And a huge chunk of that precious time is being spent fighting about boxes. That is the real expense here, not the property tax on unused square footage. The emotional bandwidth being drained out of a 29-year marriage by something that, with the right approach, doesn't have to be a battlefield at all. So if you're watching this and you recognize yourself, or your spouse, or your parents in this exact situation, here's what I want you to actually do, starting today, not someday. Pick one small space, not the whole garage, not the whole basement, one shelf. Don't lead with, "We need to get rid of this." Lead with curiosity. Ask them to pick their favorites instead of asking them to surrender everything. Frame it around safety and time, not mess and judgment. And give it weeks, not a weekend, because real change that sticks in a marriage almost always comes slower than you want it to and faster than you expect once the right approach finally clicks. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about money in retirement. It's not just about the accounts, the pensions, the Social Security checks. The biggest financial asset either of you has left at this stage of life is time, and how peacefully you spend it together. Don't let a workbench you haven't touched in 20 years cost you more of that than it already has. If this helped you see your own situation a little differently, do me a favor and stick around, because there's a whole series of these real letter breakdowns coming. And trust me, the next one might hit even closer to home.